Ebony, did you know that we wrote a book together?
No, tell me more.
Yeah, it's this awesome book called History versus Women.
That sounds amazing. Are we going on a tour?
We sure are. Starting October 3rd, we are on tour for a week. We'll be stopping in Pittsburgh, Boston, New York, Austin, Texas, Atlanta, Georgia, Washington, D.C., Santa Cruz, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle.
Where can folks go to find out more?
Check out historyversuswomen.com for all the info. Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is episode 45. I'm your host, Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined by my fellow single parents, Ebony Astor and Carolyn Pettit.
Hey.
Hello.
Yeah.
Single parents to who? To my cat?
Yeah, well, I'm
fair.
I'm a
Well,
single
we
parent
co-parent
here.
my cat.
We do, but not at the same time, right?
Sure.
So I'm a single parent when I'm looking after her, and you're a single parent.
And Ebony's got nothing.
Yeah, I'm the
No,
single
nothing at
parent.
all.
I'm the single parent to you.
Fair. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love, or alternatively, we're the feminist killjoys coming for your media, depending on your perspective. Today's show will dive into Searching, a highly original 2018 film about a father's search for his missing daughter, exclusively presented through the medium of screenshots, video calls, and social media conversations. After that, we'll finish the show by each sharing a little something in What's Your Freak-Out? Now, on with the show.
All right, how was everyone's weekend?
It was fine. How was your weekend?
Yeah, it was fine.
Cool.
Yeah.
I watched a lot of trash TV.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Like what-
I
like
went in
what?
a trash hole. I'm not saying what I watched.
Oh, okay.
It's so bad.
Okay.
I won't even admit it.
Wow.
But I did that. I also went for a hike, though, in between watching 3 seasons of a show in one weekend. I didn't watch it.
Okay, now we gotta know. Even if
Nope.
you don't tell the audience, but when we break, I gotta know what you
Sure.
watched.
Absolutely. I will let you privately know so you can make fun of me till the ends of the earth.
Oh yeah.
Carolyn,
Yeah.
what happened in this week's entertainment news?
Whew. Well, on Saturday, the gaming industry was left reeling by news of the sudden closure of Telltale Games. This news was especially surprising because it means that that projects that were already underway, like the final season of The Walking Dead, which the first episode had already been released, will now not be completed, as well as other projects that had been announced, such as a second season of The Wolf Among Us and a Stranger Things adventure game are now, canceled. But really, why I think this is important is because it has generated a lot more buzz online around the topic of unionization in the games industry, because the employees of Telltale were left without any severance. And these are people who many of them were living, paycheck to paycheck. They weren't making, a great deal of money there at Telltale. By many reports, Telltale was an extremely kind of poorly run company. Employees were sort of overworked, and there was the mentality at Telltale, from what I've heard from what the buzz around the whole situation seems to be. That's a common mentality in many gaming studios, which is you get to work in games. Therefore, you should work for less and you should work harder because it's games, and aren't you passionate about this? And don't you know that so many people would kill to work in games?
Yeah, we create a cute little name to describe it. Crunch.
Yes.
We're just in Crunch. Isn't that cute? And
Yeah.
so many game studios will bring in food and chefs and just so you breakfast, lunch, and dinner so that you never have to leave, as if that is somehow an incentive to stay. And I'm wondering, do other tech industries also have the same problem?
Right.
In the same way? Is games specifically more extreme than other tech companies in this kind of crunch mentality?
Think that's, I would venture to guess that it is in those periods of time when, say, a big, release is nearing, the announced release date, and there's still so much work to be done. I imagine that in those windows of time, you may see a level of crunch in game studios that generally surpasses that even at other tech
Because I hear from my individual friends about like working extreme hours,
Sure.
Especially at startups and that sort of thing. But I maybe it's just the environment we're in, but I feel like these conversations are very heightened in games. Like it's reaching a breaking point of like we can't keep working people like this.
Exactly. And to that point, I want to share a few tweets that came out in the wake of Telltale's collapse. Rami Ishmael of Vlambeer tweeted, reminder, if you do your job well for exactly the minimal amount of hours, that should be enough to earn a livable wage, deserve your days off, get considered for a promotion or raise, and keep your job. Any system that works otherwise is exploitative. Another tweet from Wan Kao says, Telltale relied on the, quote, it's a privilege to work here mentality, so people put up with lower wages, toxic leadership, unreasonable deadlines. Since everyone was passionate about their work, they looked the other way. Now 200 plus devs are unemployed. Unionize game workers. Finally, Lara Hudson tweeted an image, and with the image she said Telltale in 2 tweets. And so the tweet was the image was 2 different tweets. One from Elizabeth Sampat, which said, my heart absolutely goes out to Telltale employees and their families, but do not forget, years and years of crunch did not save this studio, and it will not save yours. Telltale died as it lived, fucking over its employees in immoral, inexcusable ways for zero upside. The other tweet from Brandon Sabenka is somebody who got laid off at Telltale, and their tweet says, none of my sleepless nights or long hours on weekends trying to ship a game on time got me severance today. Don't work overtime unless you're paid for it, y'all. Protect your health. Companies don't care about you. So anyway, it's a terrible situation. I'm definitely, I really hope that all of the talented Telltale devs who are left high and dry by this situation land on their feet. But I also hope that this does serve as some kind of wake-up call to nudge the conversations around unionization in games, which were already sort of starting to gain momentum, that it puts a new kind of urgency behind those conversations.
Yeah, as someone whose proximity to gaming solely happens on Thursdays when we stream, and I do a half-assed job modding our stream, I didn't understand, or didn't recognize, rather, a lot of the names that were being floated about in this conversation, but so much of this conversation needs to happen on a larger level in terms of, like, labor in this country, right? And predictably, the ice-cold takes that I saw with people tweeting like, these people should work for free, just get these games done and out. If they truly were passionate about, games and the fans and doing right by the fans, they would work for free, which I don't even know how you would fix your fingers to type something like that, let alone believe it. Carnival of trolls who then popped in to somehow tie this to women in gaming, and the notion that, like, when you hire women, of course, bankruptcy is around the corner. So yeah, the part of my weekend that was spent trying to untangle what happened was just running up across these absolutely just ridiculous fucking takes on the internet.
Yeah, one of the more frustrating, things out of the many, many frustrating things about gaming culture at large to me has always been just the existence of that contingent of that not inconsequential contingent of gaming, enthusiasts who prioritize, corporations, whose loyalty is to corporations and brands and franchises, and not at all to, people, to artists, to creators. That has always been disheartening, and certainly seeing that in the wake of Telltale's collapse, seeing people say things like, yeah, if you really cared about these projects you were involved in, you'd finish them for free. That is just such a poisonous mentality.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to another big story of the past few days. All right. So a longtime Sesame Street writer named Mark Saltzman said in an interview with Queer Tea that he wrote Bert and Ernie's relationship as that of, quote, a loving couple. He said that during his 15-year tenure on the show, he modeled Bert and Ernie after his own romantic relationship with his male partner, even going so far as to incorporate real-life quirks into his interpretation of the characters. So I'm referring largely to a Verge story by Elizabeth Simmons, S-I-M-I-N-S, Simmons, for this story, and we'll link it in the show notes, of course. And in the story, Elizabeth points out that even Oscar the Grouch has a girlfriend named Grundgetta, which I never knew. The Count, is regularly pictured with female he's paired with women in ways that definitely have a romantic kind of aura around them. And Kermit, of course, most famously of all, Kermit, who frequently appears on Sesame Street, is known to be in a fairly dysfunctional relationship with Miss Piggy.
How dare you speak ill of their relationship?
I feel like
those are my relationship
I think that they're
goals,
destined
Carol.
to be together. I just feel like they need to go to therapy for a little while and work out a little some of their issues. And so, after this came out and people started latching on or celebrating this idea that there may be some actual kind of queer love between Bert and Ernie. Of course, the Sesame Street Workshop, issued a denial, a statement saying, that they remain puppets and have no sexual orientation, completely ignoring the fact, of course, that they have many puppets who very clearly have, romantic relationships. And
why couldn't they just not say anything?
Well, I mean, I imagine it has to do with them worried that PBS is going to lose funding, lose donors if it gets out that But I think Simmons does a great job of summarizing why it's so important that Bert and Ernie be allowed to be gay in her story. She references how Rebecca Sugar, talking about Steven Universe, says that telling queer stories in children's media is one way we can let children know that they belong in this world, which is absolutely true and so important. But also, she feels like the backlash to this news has to do with the fact that in our minds culturally, straight relationships, we can think of them in sort of sweet. We don't have to, our mind doesn't have to leap immediately to sex when we think about straight couples in media, right? You can have kind of kid appropriate, stories where, it's just sweet. They're like boyfriend, girlfriend or whatever. Whereas something culturally in us, queer relationships are more immediately linked to sex, and that is why people are made uncomfortable by this idea. And so Elizabeth says that it's important that we work to kind of create that same idea around queer relationships, that they can be sweet and just we can think of them as romantic and sweet or whatever the way we do straight relationships. And there's a piece missing culturally there.
Yeah, just the notion that that queer identity is something you have to age into being aware of, that somehow 3-year-olds are not capable of existing in a world in which they know that queer people exist. And have relationships is so ludicrous. But as you say, it's just, it's this fundamental inability to separate queer identity from physical sexual acts, and it's just so horrifying. I mean, in an ideal world, the Children's Television Workshop would have come out and been like, Bert and Ernie are a long-term couple. They're going to be together forever. Deal with it. But in the absence of that kind of courage, if they had just not said anything, but to come out, and like explicitly say our puppets don't have a sexual orientation just revealed like such a blinkered understanding of the power of media and also what's actually being talked about here and their own complicity in replicating it. Because yeah, as you say, like so many of the characters or the puppets on Sesame Street and other stuff from Henson, like they're coded and they're gendered, and a lot of these like iconic, male puppets have like a female companion, Yeah. And that's assumed to be great. And you think about like children's clothes, for instance, and, baby onesies that say like future heartbreaker, future, lady killer or whatever. And yet, if you had a baby onesie that was like, future same-sex marriage official, I don't know, whatever, people would be up in arms. I mean, not just because that is a stupid slogan, but you see what I'm saying.
Yeah. You got to work on your pitch there.
Listen, this is one of the many reasons why I don't design clothes for children.
Hey, are you enjoying Feminist Frequency Radio? Then help keep us on the airwaves by joining our podcast community at d.rip/femfreak.
All right, let's move on to the main topic for today. We are going to discuss Searching, which is the new movie starring John Cho and Deborah Messing. It takes place entirely through screens, whether it is social media screens, whether it's texting, cameras, news reports, etc. And so it's a really innovative style of storytelling. And the narrative of the film is that John Cho's character, whose name I'm already forgetting.
David Kim.
Thank you. His 16-year-old daughter goes missing, and he's desperately trying to find her, which is it's a pretty standard mystery story kind of scenario in this very innovative filmmaking casing.
And so I guess I want to start off by saying that as a kind of classic traditional thriller, just in that sense, I think this film works so well. Like it's the most effective in terms of just that traditional idea of a movie that kind of keeps you guessing. It keeps you on the edge of your seat. It has twists and turns and things. Like this film totally delivers on that level. And I was definitely like just enjoying the ride. And I was, fully surprised at developments and thought things that, wound up not being the true and everything. I think that it's really tightly plotted just as a thriller. And then just the way that the format so effectively incorporates like a huge part of how we all live our lives today, which is on screens, on the internet, or just, on the desktop, or whatever. I think this film is so it's not just innovative in the way that it's presented, but it's also, just like, it's important not to get lost in that conversation that, hey, this is also just like a super effective kind of traditional thriller.
Yeah, I was concerned going in, even though I was excited to see my boy John Cho in this film. I was a bit reticent to see it because I was worried that the conceit, the fact that everything that is presented through screens, as Anita says, was going to get really tired really quickly, and was going to be so obviously affected throughout the movie that I would never be able to completely kind of surrender to the narrative in the way that like a lot of found footage movies, I find myself completely unable to get into it because I'm like, it's ludicrous that the person like running through this haunted house or, being chased through the woods or whatever would still have their GoPro going, that they wouldn't have dropped the camera, that their camera battery would still be live. You know what I'm saying? So I thought that the film was going to fall prey to the weight of its conceit. But it never did for me. From the very beginning, when we start to get a peek at the lives of the Kim family through their photographs and through short video clips, it just felt so natural. And I think, it's just a function of how much we are buried in technology. We're completely wrapped up in it. So it didn't feel false to me at all.
So I feel like it was a really interesting, successful experiment. I don't think that you can make another movie like this. I think it did the thing and it was cool and it was like, that's rad.
Oh, yeah.
I think I would have liked, and I think the story would not have been interesting on its own. I think it's too generic of a story. It was very well done, and it was fascinating how they did it inside of this new storytelling device. But I think they had to do that because you can't experiment with both things, right? Like the chances of failure are too high.
Right, but yeah, so that's why I was saying, like, yes, it's the story is very much in the mold of a traditional, very very traditional thriller. But I think it's a good, like, you know, it's tied. You're right. It's tied to the format, and I think all narrative media is that way to some degree. I think, you know, a lot of people, you know, when the game Gone Home came out, were like, well, why isn't this just a movie or whatever? And it's like, you don't understand how this story was crafted, like, specifically to be told via this format. And it's this format that makes the story work the way it does. If you change the format to, you know, it essentially, even if it hits the same plot points, it's effectively a completely different story because you're experiencing it in a completely different way. And
sure, but I still think, like, and again, I'm not criticizing it. I think it was a very interesting film. I just, like, I would have liked to see, like, there's red herrings in the narrative, right? As you would with this kind of story. I would have liked to see them use the technology as a red herring in some way, right? Like, there's something that messes up with the communication or something that, like, it gets reported in a different way as opposed to it just being, like, you could literally pull this entire story out and deliver it without this medium, which is fine. I'm just saying that that little added element, I think, could have been interesting.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I don't think... I guess I feel like the technology lends something to this, to the narrative even, or at least to character, the way that it's already presented. In the way that, you know, you get those moments where, you know, a mouse cursor, like, hovers over, you know, a certain button or something, and it's you can sort of sense David's, like, hesitation or his thought process.
Sure, rewriting text.
You know, rewriting
and
text, and, you know, that opens a window into David's character that we wouldn't otherwise, you know, necessarily get. And well, you know, I just feel, I mean, in that way,
there's loads of ways to do that in narrative.
Of course, yeah. But I feel like, I mean, yeah, but so, I think that this works. I think that this works to tell this story, and
I do too. I'm not trying to say I don't.
And I think that you know, I think that most films actually downplay or the level of the role that technology plays in our lives, right? How constantly so many of us are online, how much so many of our connections take place to some degree through Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and that this film is actually, in some ways, I agree that this format would get tired if it was reused, but I think that that nonetheless, this film is saying something about the way we live our lives today, that through its format, that most films don't say.
Sure. Going back to something that Ebony said, I think that the structure of the film does a service to, like, there was a lot of things in the way that they use tech that I was like, that's not really how tech is used, but I wanted to give it the benefit of the doubt the entire time, right? There's no part of me that was like, they shouldn't have done that, or that's not realistic. Like, it was fine. So, for example, he leaves his FaceTime window open
at night when he's sleeping.
or even when you're done with a call. Like, people generally don't do that, but I'm okay with that.
Right.
Or, you know, there's a scene with his brother. I'm not going to spoil it, but there's cameras set up so that you can see it as a dramatic scene because there's no actual technical communication involved. Like, I don't think that would ever happen, but I think that it was a very innovative, interesting way to be able to maintain the structure of the story while moving it forward.
Yeah, and I also appreciate the way, you know, I was worried, I think, like Ebony, that this format would grow stale, you know, over the course of the film. But I really want to give credit to the director and, you know, all the people that worked on this aspect of the film for keeping it visually interesting, not just in the sense of what's happening on screen and all the information we're given, and, you know, the way that our eyes might want to like look at this window and see if we can pick up any clues, or look in that window and see if we can pick up any clues, but also like the way the camera moves. Like it's not a stationary, you know, experience. The camera will still kind of zoom in, and it will still,
and the images degrade too, which I love.
I love that
do that
too. Yeah, when there's a close up, you know, somebody looks fuzzy. It doesn't, and sometimes the image, if it's like a live stream or something, sometimes the image stutters. I love that they don't try to present some perfected, you know, or version of the internet, that those things happen in the presentation of this film.
Yeah, I loved this film. Is a fairly, I mean, like most things in the thriller genre, ultimately betrays its very conservative, and I am using conservative with a small c here, so not necessarily like, you know, political talk, but conservative kind of beliefs, in that it is a textbook example of like the parental panic genre. And so the way that this film traffics in a notion that tech can be of help, but that ultimately can also be so dangerous, because there's so much that can be laid bare and so much that can be exploited by people who are in the know. And parents, you better watch out, because you don't know what your kids are doing online. And there's also ways in which this film, as much as I loved the way it was presented to us, it did sometimes feel like a tech commercial, and that it felt like, oh, and this is how you use Facebook, and this is how you use Snapchat, and this, you see what I'm saying? So like,
yeah,
I appreciated how well done this was, but I don't know. I guess there were the few times that it did approach starting to wear on me. It never actually reached that point, but it approached those moments, were the moments where, as you say, things weren't slick and they weren't polished, but sometimes it seemed like it was deliberately done. It didn't feel as naturalistic as, which seems like a weird complaint to have on a film that takes pride in not being naturalistic, that, you know, is deliberately set at a remove. You know, it's deliberately about, you know, things sort of not occurring in the moment, but recollections and memories and recordings of things that happened. But you know, the camera scenes and the the interrogation at the end. God, I feel like, I don't want to spoil anything, but the interrogation at the end.
I mean, we can put up a spoiler warning if we want to go into spoilers.
Yeah, the cameras in in Uncle Peter's place. Those were the moments where it threatened to kind of break down for me, because
also the cops would never send an interrogation video to.
Oh no,
right? Like
yeah,
that kind
of course.
of shit.
But I mean, again,
but I was okay.
Like,
I was willing to give
like,
them
this
that.
This is an example again of like, we have to make allowances to some small degree for the format, and I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm okay with all of that. Obviously, I am okay with it.
I kept laughing at inappropriate times, because there was some ways that they used tech that I thought was really funny and smart, and like was very. There's so much nostalgia here, right? In terms of like Windows XP and like, you know, all of that stuff. But the part that the first one that I really like chuckled at and sticks in my mind is the Apple sleep pattern, and them setting, so when your computer goes to sleep, there's a screensaver that comes up, and it's that like wispy purple thing, and they set like dramatic music to the motion of that, and just like, it's just this funny thing, because you're like, this is the most mundane aspect of our tech, and now it's like this huge dramatic like musically rendered item, and it was so funny how they did things like that.
The funniest thing for me was the fact that a bunch of 15 and 16-year-olds were still on Facebook.
Yeah, well, there's that too, but also like there were applications that I don't think actually exist. Most of it was real, but there was something like Cross Messenger, where it's like, how are you texting on iMessage from your fucking computer at work, which is not a Mac,
right?
You know, like that kind of stuff. But there was, so I thought that I really appreciated the part where when it went public that this daughter was missing, that everyone had a fucking opinion, and the way that our social media and our news media engage with that. So having people be like, it really starts at home, or like, fuck that guy, he probably killed his own daughter. And in one of those, like you were saying, Carolyn, you start like looking around for clues. In one of the websites, there's a clickbait link that said, guy on bath salts caught destroying public park. And I just like, it was just, I wanted to like screenshot and like pause and read all of the different like almost Onion style things that the creators made.
Yeah, and another thing I liked about that whole kind of sequence where we're seeing like the cruel memes that people are making of David, where, you know, like a photo of him with a kind of a doofy face and it says like Father of the Year or something, like all this stuff saying that he killed his daughter and, you know, things like that. There's also a little nod to the tremendous insincerity that can pervade the internet at times, the way people will. So you see a bit of a YouTube video that a classmate of Margot's who didn't really know her at all, who didn't care, who is kind of dismissive of David when he calls her to ask, who ran the study group. Once like this turns into a big crisis, a big news story, she puts out this teary YouTube video about how, Margot was my best friend, you guys. And we all know that it's this ploy to get attention, to gain followers, whatever. But we all know that the internet is full of that kind of insincerity. And so,
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
Darth Vader is Luke's father.
What did you all think of, so major spoilers, but the conclusion of who did it? Because I think there's something really that got real brushed over in terms of like the son and why he did it. And they were just like, the mother was just like, he's not like a normal kid.
Yeah.
When I'm like, oh no, he fucking stalked the shit out of her. And I know that they made that clear, but I feel like it was just like, there wasn't enough time or space to go into the like horrificness of that. Maybe.
Yeah, I agree that was sort of brushed over. And
I think part of what I loved about this, and y'all know how much crime drama I watch. So I watched this through the lens of my TV consumption. And I thought, without the conceit of the presentation of the screens, this thriller works so much better as a TV show because we would get more time for the emotional beats and also have more time to build up to the twists and turns, the red herrings, etc., and then show the resolution. And it would be even more effective if this was like, a 6-episode series, because I did want more time with the perpetrator, the actual perpetrator, and seeing what it was like for Margot to experience what she was experiencing from him when she was being catfished. Spoiler alert. But also the red herring midway through where we think, oh my God, it's actually this guy who did it. We would have had more time sort of sitting with the anxiety and the discomfort of that reckoning as well.
I mean, I actually think that the brevity works in the film's favor overall because I feel like the relentlessness of the kind of revelations and the twists and things, to me, that was part of what made it work as well as it did. I think that if we had the room for that kind of deeper consideration, then the sort of the House of Cards would kind of start to fall apart a little bit, potentially. I feel like this is deliberately like a very kind of economical film that has these beats that it wants to hit and keep going so that the tension just keeps building and building. And, in my mind, that worked. I mean, I totally see what you're saying.
Yeah, I guess, for me, one of the things that would have happened, and I don't want to suggest that the film doesn't work because I really enjoyed this movie. But if it were, in a different format, so this is, an alternate universe, whatever, one of the things that we could have gotten was more time with Margot herself. As it is, she never becomes a fully realized character to me. And so this is just another example of a film that's about trauma to women and how it affects men rather than Margot being a fully realized character of her own. And so I fully empathize with John Cho's, his anger and his frustration and his rage and his sadness, his abiding grief. But I never really felt like Margot was a real person.
Well, that's totally, totally fair. But I also feel like we are experiencing this through David's eyes, and part of the whole sort of power of the film is this feeling David gets that he doesn't really know who his daughter is. And that if she were more developed as a character to some degree, it would undercut that feeling of the unknown as David is trying to figure out what was actually going on in her life and who she really is. I don't know. I mean, that's,
I'm saying
I'm not like championing underdeveloped female characters here or anything, but I guess I just feel like, again, like, for the specific story this film is telling, I feel like the choices that it made in that regard, I feel like they worked really well. I also want to talk briefly about the opening, the opening, 8, 10, 12 minutes, or that I thought did an exceptional job.
It was like the Up. It was like what they tried to do with Up.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And it does such, in my mind, it does a really exceptional job of getting us emotionally invested in the lives of the Kims from the get-go, super quickly, and in a way that also works to highlight the role of technology, and the internet and, Windows XP, in the past, in our lives. So Matt Zoller Seitz wrote a piece about this film for RogerEbert.com, and he loves the whole intro. I just want to read a bit of his comments on it. He says, it's a little masterpiece of narrative compression that deserves favorable comparison with the opening of Pixar's Up. Not just because of its ability to elicit tears, but because it compresses a feature film's worth of emotional power into a few fleet minutes without making you feel as if the movie had rushed you through anything important. I can't think of another recent sequence that better shows how our emotions are intertwined with the boringly ordinary digital tasks we perform all day, every day. Notice, for instance, how David moves videos that will have enormous nostalgic value later into specific folders to make them easier to find. Also impressive is the way the film treats the simple act of scheduling events, like Pamela coming home from the hospital, as indicators of the family's fears and dreams, and devices for generating empathy as well as suspense. Every time the homecoming date is moved, we can feel our stomachs tighten up a bit more, anticipating the worst.
Although, just like Up, it is still using the woman as refrigerator trope. Putting that out there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I do give this film points for centering an Asian American family, and not like erasing the fact that they're Asian. There's some bits about the kimchi gumbo and stuff like that, and while obviously still being a film that
I still think that, though, like I think that if they pitched this show with the mother alive and the father dying, it wouldn't have had the same all of the sentiment and all of the ways that we perceive it are just not the same because of the way we think about gender and grief and loss. And I think that is still something that we need to like break down and break through in our media. Yeah.
And From Reverence to Rape, which is a landmark book on women and gender in film, there's a kind of a whole section about how, if we see a man showing care, any care or concern for his child or whatever, it's this like deeply emotional experience for us as the audience because we don't expect it. Like, it's so moving to see this man care about his kids, and those stories can like elicit tears and everything. Whereas, we just expect women to do that, to have that kind of care for their children. So when we see those narratives on screen, it's like it doesn't have any real emotional resonance. And that is, that's absolutely.
And also the comparison that the film makes between a father's overwhelming love and the ways that that can become poisonous when it's a mother's overwhelming love, right? You know, that there's something about a father's love that when necessary will rise to, like, when he is a protector, nevertheless maintains like sort of appropriate boundaries. But women, when they surrender fully to like that maternal instinct, there's the danger that they will become too closely, identified with and solicitous of their children. And it can become something that poisons them and the child.
I wonder if also, absolutely, I agree with that. I wonder if also there's something to how, there is more leeway for a man in this situation to be negligent of his daughter's emotional life. Whereas if a woman was negligent, the audience would interpret that as like cruel or as negligent, right? Like as like a bad, like we're like, he's a bad parent for doing that, but grief and blah, 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 and men, and we don't expect the same level and quality of caregiving.
100%. Absolutely.
And, I'm kind of like, oh shit, I didn't mean to totally shit on this movie. But also, I think these are bigger issues around.
These are not issues just with Searching as an individual film. These are issues with the representations of men and women in cinema more broadly. But it's still relevant to talk about them in relation to Searching, of course. Totally
unrelated to anything important.
Okay.
The whole time I was watching this, I kept thinking about how so many of us are trying to be less attached to our devices and less on social media and stepping away from it. And when you walk into a movie, you're kind of hoping that that's a part of the process of stepping away from your phone. Mm-hmm. And the whole time I was like, oh my God, this is 2 hours of being on my phone. Yeah. Right? But there was no escape of the how inundated we are with screens.
Yeah. So, and in that way, it could work as a bit of a commentary on that, maybe inadvertently,
but it's also what you were saying when we first started talking about how this really does highlight the way that our lives are built online and what that looks like and what that means to our existence. Like her using a live streaming service to be connected, but not actually trying to be connected to people in her life or that know her, I've done that when I was a teenager. I think that it's a really relevant, important thing to recognize that happens, and what that means.
Right. And so for the most part, even when even when there were things that were kind of a little falsified for the sake of the narrative, overall, how the film was representing our relationship to technology, for the most part, felt genuine.
Although that shit where he goes onto the live streaming service and says, "Can you see me?" And then he opens the video and it's like, blah, blah, blah appeared, blah, blah, blah went away.
Yeah.
Right? And you're like, it was just that shit was cracking up at that. That was really funny.
Yeah.
A lot of people, so I honestly didn't know what this movie was when I walked into the theater. But I had heard someone be like, bring tissues or whatever. And I'm definitely a crier in movies. It just didn't hit hard enough to elicit emotion, deep emotions from me. And so I think because I feel like it was supposed to do that.
Huh.
I'm a little lukewarm on the story.
Sure. Are you dead inside, Anita?
I might be.
I wasn't moved to tears by the film. I found the ending, where they're reunited and,
I was like, she better not be dead. She better not be dead.
I found it very cathartic. I found it a tremendous relief.
Or that shit with his brother.
Oh,
that sort of red herring thing. We all went there and you're like,
oh God, that was super uncomfortable.
I wrote that exact note. I wrote, I am so uncomfortable in my notebook.
Yeah. Okay, spoilers. It is very much assumed that she's sleeping with her uncle. And then it turns out that it's just weed. That he's just selling her weed and they're getting high together, which I'm like, oh, that's cute. I like that. That's adorable.
Yeah.
But it's built up in this whole and
it's really smart the way that an earlier little comedy gag pays off later because they're talking about the gumbo recipe and
big jar of buds
and
on
David
the
David sees in the foreground this huge jar of pot and then he's like, I'm pretty sure there's no pot in the gumbo, and his brother is like, oh, let me just put away this jar of organic oregano or whatever.
right.
And it's just this little joke, and then it totally comes back to pay off later on.
Yeah, totally. So closing statements. I feel like people should absolutely see this movie. I think that what they're doing, if you give a shit about filmmaking at all, especially, like what they're doing with how they're telling the story is fascinating, and it'll engage you. Yeah. Right, like even if it doesn't blow you away, it's a fascinating filmmaking conceit that is done very, very well.
And I mean, I just like John Cho.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I think that he has, obviously, I think this is something that people have been kind of pushing for a while since the starring John Cho hashtag. But I think he has leading man, potential, leading man qualities, and I'd love to see him in more stuff. On Ebony's brother's patented 100-star scale, I give this 80 stars out of 100, which is way more accurate.
How is that different than Metacritic?
It's way more accurate than saying that I give it 4 stars out of 5 or 8 out of 10. I give it 80 stars out of 100.
How is a 100-star scale different than Metacritic?
You'd have to talk to my brother, and he would listen. We could conference him in right now, and he could give you a quick 20 minutes about the 100-star system because he's got that in his back pocket. At every moment. Yeah, my final thoughts, I really enjoyed the film. The only way I could have enjoyed it more is if it was a 6-episode limited series set in Copenhagen. Final notes about John Cho. There's a moment where he's on a video call at work, and I thought, shit, even John Cho looks bad on video calls, and I felt better about myself. And also, this might be the first movie, and probably will be the only movie, in which a Google Excel spreadsheet was instrumental in helping to solve a case. And I just wanted to shout out.
I love that spreadsheet.
I just want to shout out that spreadsheet.
There's one great joke that I don't want to give away, but David calls a young man, who is like, I don't have to tell you anything, man. Like, he doesn't want to give up his alibi. Mm-hmm. He's like, I don't have to tell you anything. And David finally kind of pressures him to give up the alibi. And we see in the spreadsheet what the alibi is. And I got a good laugh out of that.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to What's Your Freak Out? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Oh, wow.
I
know. I was trying to be nice because Carol's been going first so long, but Carol, go ahead. Keep it consistent.
All right, yeah. So, I mean, maybe it's best if I go first, since my freak out it's kind of a lukewarm freak out, to be honest. I don't have, like, something that I'm super psyched about this week or super, like, upset about, other than the Telltale situation, which I already talked about, and a million other things. But so there's a new, speaking of limited series, Ebony, there's a new limited series on Amazon Prime called
Jack Ryan.
Oh yeah, it's fucking dope. It's called Forever.
Yes,
and it stars Fred Armisen and Maya Rudolph.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love her.
Yeah, so.
But I'm not really a big fan of his.
Okay, well, it's actually like she's more important overall.
I mean, she is.
No, but also in the story.
Do you know that she's in a Prince cover band
called Princess?
Called Princess.
Yeah. Yes.
And their cover of Darling Nikki is amazing.
Yes.
Okay. Fun facts.
Anyway, so Forever, like it's it's about a married couple, Fred Armisen and Maya Rudolph.
She would never marry him.
Right, but the character.
Anita, will you let Carol freak out about this, please?
So, that's actually interesting because the character she plays in this series would marry him. And
wait, I'm sorry, could you explain acting to me?
And so, what I really appreciated most about this series is Maya Rudolph's performance. It's not a showy performance. It's not a big dramatic performance. She doesn't have like the Oscar bait moments of like doing something really, big and dramatic and intense. It's very much like a performance of internalized emotion. And Forever is a very, very spoilable show. So I'm sort of trying to be, vague in talking about it, but it's about a married couple, and it is to some degree about like the big questions of like, what does it all mean? Like, as routine sets in, as they're together for years and years, and things start to feel pretty, routine. Maya Rudolph's character begins to kind of question more and more, like, what is the point of doing all this? And I think that a show like The Good Place confronts these questions in a much more kind of entertaining, fun, humorous way. But there's still something about Forever which has kind of stayed in my mind and is kind of just, making me think in some ways. Again, it's a limited series, so there's just the 8 episodes, half an hour each, so it's like 4 hours total. And it almost ends with what you would think would be like the cliffhanger to the next season, and like, oh, they're going somewhere interesting with the next season, but they're not. Because it's a limited series, and this is the whole thing, and it definitely like leaves questions unanswered, and there's stuff that you're just kind of like, what is the deal with that? But nonetheless, like, it's so I'm not like giving it an enthusiastic recommendation, but I'm glad I watched it, especially again because I think Maya Rudolph's performance is so interesting in this series. It's so kind of intimate, it's observational, it's it's revealing. It's so anyway, yay for Maya Rudolph in Forever.
Right on.
Awesome. Ebony?
Okay, so my freak out, this is a pre-freak out because I haven't had a chance to dig into this yet, but I'm freaked.
Is this one of your Wikipedia read-throughs?
Oh my God, no, but I can't believe y'all don't do that. We'll get back to this later. No, this is something, I'm freaking out that it exists, and I fully expect to freak out about the content once I'm able to dig into it. One of the things that I have been steadily saying that I want to learn more about, and I'm also constantly like, God, I wish I knew more about this. I'm so, envious, and in admiration of people who are experts on this and who really do the work, is prison abolition and restorative justice. And, I'm saying this to myself constantly, right? And reading Twitter and following people on social media, and being like, wow, these people are so awesome. They know so much about this. And then, of course, it hit me, as it does a couple of times a year, where I'm like, you could learn more about these things. It's not impossible. This information is not being kept from you. So my freak out this week is that Mariam Kaba, who is an organizer, an educator, an activist dedicated to dismantling the prison industrial complex, announced that there is a new curriculum for people to learn from and employ during October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So I'm just going to read a little bit about this curriculum unit. It's intended to help activists, advocates, organizers, and community members to learn more about the criminalization of domestic violence survivors. We hope that you will use it during this October's Domestic Violence Awareness Month and beyond to raise consciousness and to encourage others to join the fight to end the criminalization of survival. So this is put out through the organization Survived and Punished, which is a national coalition that includes survivors, organizers, victim advocates, etc., to decriminalize surviving domestic and sexual violence. So during this month of October, Domestic Violence Awareness Month, I'm going to dig into this curriculum. I'm going to try and stop talking about it and be about it. When I say that, I want to learn more about these issues, about prison abolition, about restorative justice, I'm gonna put that in front of myself and do it. And so if anyone is interested in doing it with me, the link will be in the show description.
Awesome. I kind of want to do that.
Let's do it.
Not that we don't have 1,000 things happening.
Yeah, but you know what? We got the privilege to like,
yeah.
Let's
read on planes.
Listen, what I'm saying is, you and I, listen, we're honest about the fact we watch trash TV, right? How about if I watch 1 hour less of trash TV a week? Just one.
I think about that a lot, man. I watch too much TV and don't read enough.
So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna give this up. And Mariam Kaba is like, yo, I'm in awe of her brain and her heart. So follow her. She's at Prison Culture on Twitter.
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
Huh. Cool. Awesome. Fun fact, I didn't have a freak out this week, but I'm going to freak out about the elementary season finale, but I can't talk about it. So, like, I don't know. Other than, like, I am freaking out about it. I don't have a lot to say that's not going to fuck it up. But, like, Ebony and I were, like, texting during this whole process.
Yeah, I was
like,
texting you being like, are you what? Is it done yet? Tell me when you're done. We got it. I couldn't wait.
So, okay, without... Okay, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I am going to say that there are I definitely like cried in moments of the last 2 episodes, and there are these moments between Sherlock and Watson that, where I'm just like, I fucking love these people together.
Yep.
Like their relationship and the way it's grown and the way like something happens to Watson. And Sherlock thinks it's his fault. And before he can even say, like, I'm really sorry, she's like, you know, not in a good spot. And she says, don't even say I'm sorry. And, like, I just started bawling. Like, that whole scene, I was like, oh, my God, I love them so much. They're so, like, supportive and there for each other. And, like, the effort it took to get there and, like, the love between them without it being a romantic relationship, without it being, like, you know, a traditional show like this would build romantic tension and sexual tension for the entire show until like the one time that they sleep together or whatever. And this never did that. And so it feels so much more sincere and more honest and caring. So
and earned. Like,
yeah, very much. And so the other thing is that I saw a bunch of people tweeting about like, holy shit, is the show canceled? And there's all these articles about, is the show canceled? And I was like, what the fuck happens in this season finale that people are like wondering if it was canceled? So what happened? So the show is not canceled, but they found out super late. So they had planned a narrative in which the show could be wrapped up. They got another half season, which I gotta say I'm a little bit bummed about because I feel like the show wrapped up really nicely. I really like how they...
So the finale, as somebody who doesn't watch the show, this season finale could work as a series finale.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It was beautiful. It was an emotional roller coaster. I think it ended really well. You know, like I don't want to not experience them anymore, but like it's been on for 7 years or whatever, right? It's been a while. I think it's been 7 years. So now I'm like, well, if they only get another half season, like I don't want it. Like I don't want them to fuck that up in some way.
If they know, like now they know that it's the end, maybe
do they? Is it?
I mean, I would assume so.
I would assume so too. But what's the point of like bringing it back for 10 episodes?
I mean, maybe
other than money,
right? I mean, maybe the writers, the team have an idea of like one last story arc that they want to do to really wrap the show up the way they want to.
Yeah, it's going to take some effort to...
Sure.
It's going to deal with how they ended things is going to take some effort.
I see.
And then it's going to make it weird. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm a little bit conflicted.
I'm hopeful because the way that the show was ended brings the this iteration of Holmes and Watson back in a really cool way to sort of the origins of the Holmes myth. So I'm excited to see what they do with it. These writers, this showrunner, Rob Doherty, I just feel like they've earned my trust. So I'm okay with it.
I know. I agree with that. I agree with that. They've definitely earned my trust. I just feel like sometimes things just need to end and we need to just let them end. But I would also be happy with the show running for like 10 more seasons and doing a whole fucking Law and Order. It's fine. I'd be totally cool with that. All right, y'all. If you want to submit your own freak out, it might make it on the show. I think we have some freakouts that I did not prepare for this episode. Sorry. But please submit your own and it might make it on the show. So head over to femfreak.com/freakout. That is our show. You can catch us back here every single Wednesday. Stay tuned for the bonus episode, which is only available as a backer of this podcast, which you can be. So head over to d.rip/femfreak. If you're enjoying the show, please rate and review us on iTunes. And when you're, hanging out with friends at a restaurant and you're just all sitting on your phones and not talking, you can text each other being like, yo, been listening to this really awesome podcast called Feminist Frequency Radio. You should listen to it so that we still can continue to not talk to each other.
That sounds totally like a conversation someone would have. You're good at dialogue.
So good. You can check out all of our work and our other podcasts at feministfrequency.com, and be sure to follow us on Twitter at FemFreak to stay up to date on all the news. You can find us individually on Twitter as well. I don't know why, because my fucking mentions are a dumpster fire and I refuse to look at them anymore. But, you know, whatever. Just follow me at Anita Sarkeesian.
I'm at Carolyn Michelle.
I am Stop Making John Cho Cry.
Aww. Our producer is Phil Serkis, who also composed our theme music, technical support by Sarah Norales, and art by Jamie Varon. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Later.